Hey y'all, how y'all doing today? So I am excited to share that I have rebranded Finding Your HR Advocacy Voice to Who's Your HR. And so I'm going to show you that real quick so you can see the spelling of Hoosier, and it's Who's Your HR. Okay, so if you know me, I'm really cheesy with words, and I just I don't want to digress with that, but I love to play around with words, and so that's a dual meaning, right? So who's your HR? I'll Hoosier. Well, first we'll talk about the Hoosier is a state of Indiana, right? We know Hoosier hospitality, the Hoosiers, and so I thought it was, I'm just cheesy, but it just made sense to go with that Hoosier. I like that, and then also who's your HR? Because sometimes as you dig deep in the world of HR and some of these cases and some of these things that are happening, sometimes you're like, who's your HR? Do you guys have an HR department? Do you guys take HR seriously? Is HR empowered within your organization to do the work that they need to do? Or if you do have an HR department, lend their ears this way, right? So who's your HR? And so I'm really excited about that. And then I also wanted to share the story behind it, because I don't really share that all the time, or maybe I share that with a few people here and there. And so if you're interested in learning a little bit about the story and why you should be tuning in, right? And honestly, here, bold move challenge. This is a bold move challenge for me to start, trying things differently and just being okay with the practice of it all. Well, when I first started Finding Your HR Advocacy Voice with Schrader, that was really because, Chris and I was spending a lot of time having conversations about the whole process. And when I got involved in government affairs, I didn't fully understand. Like, I've been involved in politics, but I wasn't involved in government affairs, right? Like, so what that was. And so we were having conversations about government affairs, just learning about, there were so many things that were happening that, I would ask questions and we would just talk about just how the whole process works. And through that, I decided I wanted to start like a podcast of us talking about these different things, because I wanted to start capturing some of that knowledge. And back to this bold move challenge, sometimes we don't really learn how to do things until we actually start doing them, right? Like, and me, and I've done the strengths finders. So I'm like in the head, right? Like all my top 5, at least one of them's in relationship building, but I'm in the head. So I tend to stay in the head and overthink. And so for me, I'm one of those people that in order for me to break out of that, I just have to put myself through it and just do it. I have to challenge myself, right? Like I just have to do it. And I have to find some sort of way to tell my mind, like, we're just going to do it. So I decided, you know what, we're just going to do the podcast. And so that I can have an opportunity to start talking about government affairs, or at least start understanding the language or learning the language. Because I feel, now this is my own observation, I feel that sometimes we don't get involved in these type of conversation, especially when it has something to do with government or politics, because we don't really know how to talk about it, because sometimes the words it's so confusing. There's so many acronyms. There's so much legalese that it's hard to make sense. It's hard to make sense of policy. And then when you try to talk about it, sometimes you feel like you're stuttering a lot, which I do a lot when I'm talking about government affairs. And I still do, it may be at different levels or at a different degree. But what I've learned is that the more you talk about it, the more you start to feel comfortable talking about it. You feel comfortable using words. You feel comfortable asking questions because you have a basic understanding. And then you start to realize, like, it's about learning vocabulary now, terminology, but you start to understand it. You start to learn it. And so that was very helpful for me. So Finding Your Advocacy Voice did that for me, the few years that we did that. But then now we also have Rachel Guin, which is also a new addition, which I'm excited about on the podcast. And it shows me that even with her addition, there's some progress, there's some growth that I've even made for myself on this podcast. And changing the name to Who's Your HR just seems perfect. Now, what is Who's Your HR all about? Well, Who's Your HR is all about first understanding that there's policies, there's cases that are being decided on that impact how we actually administer HR within the business, right? And or at least the way that we understand how HR needs to be administered within the business. And it seems more than ever, right? Like now is the time for HR people to truly understand how these court decisions, how these different guidances that are being rescinded, how these different things impact the way that we do HR. And so now we need to make sure that, we're asking people, who's your HR? Like people need to realize like HR is important. Right. HR is important. And then also there's the conversation of, sometimes there's people feel that HR is not here to support them. And so when I'm asking that question, who's your HR? I'm seeing it from both lens. There's the employer lens, right? Because as HR professionals, we support the employer in ensuring that they remain compliant, and we make sure that we get them the people that they need to execute on their organizational goals. Right. But at the same time, we need to be there for the employees, helping employees understand what their rights are and understand how to look at the handbook and and make sure that you realize that the handbook is not just something that you sign, but the handbook is your contract, your rights, understanding how you're supposed to navigate different things throughout the organization. And I feel that as HR people, HR professionals, we need to be able to understand that there's both. There's the employer and the employee, and we're there to support both. We're there to support both, right? We're there to support both. And maybe I have that opinion because my HR experience started, or, I have an HR experience as an employee, but my HR experience as helping the organization started in public sector HR. And so I just have a very different perspective on sometimes, you realize that there's a certain, I don't know, you have to have a certain kind of moxie in public sector HR because, when you're dealing with politics, you kind of, you have to cross the line. And sometimes, it becomes a little bit tougher, right? So, but I'm digressing on that. But to be able to have the conversations that we need to have from both perspectives, right? Because there's a lot of people that go around even bashing HR, because I think that sometimes, not really understanding the dynamics of what HR has to deal with. There needs to be a place where we can talk about the different things that are happening, right? Like, so coming up next Wednesday, we're going to talk about the Indiana bills that have come up. And the bills that I'm tracking, that I kind of, chose to track. And then I'm going to hear from both Chris and Rachel to see what their perspectives, opinions on any of the bills that I flagged for tracking. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about it from both ends. And then maybe talk about we'll talk about what it's doing, what the policies are doing to the way that we do work, or the way that we think about policies strategically. And then it'll also talk to the how we do what needs to be done, right? Because there's a lot of contradiction sometimes, even in the space of HR, right? Like just because a court case was decided a certain way doesn't mean you get laxed on how you handle situations within the workplace, right? Like the audit for the FLSA, right? So there's just different dynamics, and we'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that. But there's so many different ways that, we have to think about how we administer these policies within the workplace, because we have to build culture beyond compliance. It's not about building a culture that's all about compliance, but building beyond that, right? And then we'll talk about why we need to do that. Because we understand that, You can't legislate collaboration. You can't legislate innovation. These are things that have to happen organically within an organization. And you've got to understand how to do that. And HR people are the most prepared people to be able to handle that task. So who's your HR? Send them to the room, right? Like, we want them in the room. We want questions being asked of our people, with the many wisdom that they have, right? And so this is not a SHRM sponsored this is not a SHRM sponsored event, and you'll see that I share that within the podcast. But we are all involved in SHRM. So I'm involved in the Indy SHRM chapter. Chris is involved in the SCIHRA chapter, and that's in Bloomington. And then Rachel is involved in the NIHRA chapter, which is in Fort Wayne. So we've all come together, varying degrees of experience or years of experience in this sort of field. And I'm one of the newer people. And that's why this has just been a great experience for me. So Bold Move Challenge is that I wouldn't have progressed in my comprehension of how policies impact HR and how to think about it strategically, how to really build your business acumen, if it wasn't for me just taking a chance and saying, you know what, I know I don't really know that much about government affairs. And I know that if you watch my beginning shows, the beginning episodes, you're going to be like, man, she doesn't know anything. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that, because I think that we need to start creating spaces where people can realize, like, it's okay to start from ground zero. Just start today, right? Because if you don't start today, you'll never grow, right? What does Zig Ziglar say? Like, you can't be great. You can't be great if you don't. Oh, I can't remember it, but y'all know what it is. And I know that if somebody listens to this video all the way through, they're going to be like, oh, you were talking about that Zig Ziglar thing. You were talking about that quote, and I'm talking about that quote. That's right. I'm talking about that quote, that you've got to start to be great, right? Like, you want to be great. Okay, great. But you've got to start. And sometimes, and if government affairs is something that you want to get involved in, and what I love about this is, and I should also share what I also love about our podcast. And this is what you're going to do on the podcast, right? Like, you'll get to do by chiming in and being a part of the community, is that, you get to, it's okay to be angry and upset with some of the things that we're seeing, right? But it's not okay to not try to really see it for yourself and learn it for yourself. Like, that part's not okay, right? Like, it's not okay just to go by the news and just stick with the news and let that be your only way to consume what's happening in America, because then you'll realize, like, you're selling yourself short. And that part, you're not okay. I think we are entitled to have these conversations about what's happening, what's happening legislatively and how that impacts, especially how that impacts in HR. There was somebody that was a part of the committee back in the days for government in Indy SHRM, and he would always say HR is the micro of the macro of politics. And honestly, I agree with that. I resonate with that. That when you've got to understand policy for yourself, and we've got to start getting involved, but we've got to get involved from a perspective of being informed rather than being polarized to being emotional. Now, here's the thing, that the more you understand how it really works, sometimes you do get upset, because sometimes I do get upset. But what I love is that I do get some sound perspective that you can't really, sometimes it honestly seems like you just can't get anywhere else. We have sound people that understand how things work legislatively, and we can, learn from them, right? And just kind of learn from their perspectives, learn from their experience that they have in the field. And then, and how we can take some of that, how we can learn some of that and put that into HR and how we administer HR, especially if you're like a one-person HR department, you have to come up with a strategy, right? Like the people strategy of how things are going to work, and understanding how things are happening in the world will help you understand how things need to happen within the workplace, right? So that you prepare your organization, to be able to weather any storm, right, that's happening in the labor force. And then at the same time, help your employees understand, what they can do to maximize, optimize, to be able to attach their own goals to the organization and how the organization can help them, right? Like creating that space. I know, but in my mind, I think of HR as that perfect liaison between the employer and the employee. And of course, I know that that only happens if you're empowered to do your job as an HR professional, that you can be that perfect liaison for both worlds and show them how we can work in harmony. But that's complicated, right? Like that's really complicated. It's not so easy, and that's why this space is created for that. And so, not only with this podcast, Who's Your HR, we're going to be talking about policies and policy up, but I want to build it out. I do have that vision for building it out, and bold move challenge. I'm trying to really figure out how that's going to work, right? Like I really want to bring on more experts to talk about different things that impact HR and just have conversations and have these frank conversations, where it's just like, especially, my BS check-in, where we can just have tough conversations. Like, let's stop tiptoeing and let's have some real conversations about real things that are happening and real things that we need to face, so we can like really be grounded in soundness and what we're doing. Right. And not go with these trends that we're seeing, how can we just gain some sound and gain some sound information on how we can really administer HR that really makes a difference. Not transactionally, but transform, like changing cultures, building cultures. Okay, because I'm digressing, right? But actually, I'm not. Like, I really am looking for people that can help, where we can have these conversations. But I realize in order to find the people to have these conversations, I need to be willing to talk about some of the things that I care about when it comes to HR. Now, I didn't even talk about how I even found myself in government affairs. Really, how I even found myself in government affairs with Indy Sherm was just that it was a spot that was open at the time. It was a spot that was open, and I wasn't going to really get another position that I was looking for. And it was a spot that was open. And so I knew that I was involved in politics before, I was involved in public sector HR. And so I thought, well, I can definitely, see what this position is about. And when I, as I started learning about the position, I honestly was confused at first. I'm not even going to lie, because it was, I really was, but having conversations with Chris helped me. But I mean, I feel like I really didn't know. And so back to Bold Move Challenge, I just knew that I wasn't happy with some of the things that I was seeing. I knew that I had a personal experience that I didn't appreciate happen to me. And I realized that, sometimes things happen because we don't know. We don't understand how things work. We don't understand. I mean, we just don't. And so I decided that, what, I was going to, I made a decision for myself that I was going to start comprehending. How do we treat better? How do we treat people better at work? How do we get better at that? And then, how do we look at legislation, and what place does legislation really have in all of that when it comes to culture? Right? I want to be able to have these tough conversations that I don't feel is really happening enough. Like when we think about DEI and we think about, what happened there, even with that, I have mixed opinions, mixed feelings on even the topic of DEI, because there were instances where I didn't agree with what I saw was happening. And there was instances where I was just like, well, even though I didn't agree with what was happening, it still doesn't mean that organizations still have to work on bringing people together in the workplace. Like you don't want to call it DEI. Okay, fine. But we still need to talk about, what does inclusiveness look like in the workplace? That's a conversation that will never go away. How do we create a place of belonging in the workplace? Like, that's a conversation that will never go away, because we still need to do that. Like, if you want people to work together and not work in silos within your organization, because then that means that they're not accomplishing and doing what they need to do, really. You have to think about how you're really going to get people to work together, and you're going to have to be real. And that's a real conversation that people need to have. You need to really think about your C suite team. How does your C suite team work together? You really need to think about that. Like, you really need to think about, how do you develop your leaders within your organization? You need to think about that. Like, these are things that you really, if you have an organization where you have more than two people, honestly, even with two people, right? Like, you always have to think about, how do we work together? How do we make sure that we work together better? Like, that's a conversation that's never going to go away, legislation or not, right? And it seems as if sometimes I want to be able to have these conversations, but I want to have these conversations with people with so many different people. And that is beyond the podcast necessarily, right? And so I really want to develop a series where we're talking about this. And if you're interested, you can reach out and let me know, because I'll tell you what the theme of the series is. And it includes, understanding policies and legislation, right? Like it includes that. It includes understanding that. And so it's really unpacking who's your HR into more employment law, more, do we understand policies? Do we understand how we can be strategic with it in the workplace? How we can make sure that as HR professionals, we're educating, the people that we serve, so that they understand that just because, what is it? I think it was a case that was decided on, where courts will now give employers the preponderance of evidence when it comes to whether a person was coded right when it comes to the FLSA. Right? I could be messing that up in some sort of way, but you know what I mean? Like, there was a court case where now I guess it's not so hard for employers to prove that they did code an employee correctly as far as FLSA. But does that mean that you can just be reckless and code anybody anyway within your organization? No, you cannot. You cannot be reckless. You must be you must, have your criteria clearly stated, and then you're coding people to that. You're coding people correctly based upon the criteria, right? Like, so so it's just being able to have these conversations and understand, and even with sexual harassment, oh my gosh, the way that that's still going on, like, HR people, like, maybe it's a conversation. Like, what do you think is really happening? So I want to have these conversations, right? I really do. And so my bold move challenge is that why I created this to say that, tune in next Wednesday, because we really do, because we want to create this space to help you. Not only am I learning, and not only are they sharing updates, but we want your questions, because we want to make sure that, here, and maybe that's my thing, but, I just want to make sure that I feel that as HR people, we are positioned to really help the state of Indiana create a great place for people to work in. We really could, because why? Because we understand HR laws, we understand how it's administered in the workplace. And so we can make sure that, things that are happening at the state level, at the Indiana General Assembly, especially when it comes to HR, that we have a say so, that we're a part of that conversation, that we're sitting at the table, and we're doing what we can to ensure that, I'll say that what I went through as an experience, here in Indiana, what I went through of, oh my goodness, I just had to stop myself right there. Really, because I want to save my backstory, the deeper backstory for another series that I'm launching. And so I'm talking over, me, uh really kind of talking about, some of the issues that I had. But But what I will say is that one thing that, my experiences have made me passionate about is that ensuring that employees understand their rights, understand that, understand how to navigate, different situations, right? Like, really being able to understand the rights that you have so that, you're not reactive, but you're proactive when you think about, entering the career place. And then for employers, I'm also passionate about, helping employers be better liaison, be better stewards of people, be better stewards of people, right? And I think that, there it's those two things, right? So that's what I'll say over what I just said, and just and for more of the backstory, stay tuned for the project that I'll be launching here, more of a vlog series. Um, I'll leave it at that. Definitely tune in next Wednesday if you're just if oh, and then also, I am going to share, and you will see that I'm going to share the policies that I'm tracking. I'm going to figure out a way to do that logistically so that you can download those ahead of time. If you're like really geeky and you really want to, if you're curious as to what bills I'm tracking, I've decided to track. And then next Wednesday, hopefully the conversation will be around those bills and, what they think about those bills, and just insight, wisdom, any bill, any information that what they think, and then what I think, why I chose those bills. So you can do that. So I'll have a way that you can do that, and you'll see that here pretty soon. But like I said, you can join the conversation next Wednesday. However, if you want to be a part of the conversation, if this is something that you're into doing, reach out, let me know. Okay, like I think I am ready is a decision, not a feeling. I am ready. Okay. Now, before I just wasn't. Before, like, but I don't know if I've even really put it out like this. But before I just, I'm not gonna lie, but that's gonna be for like a different podcast because I'm rolling out. Like I'm fixing my in 26. Because there's some that need to be fixed in 2026. And that's what I'm working on. And but reach out for real. Like I'm real talk, real talk, real talk. I'm ready to do some things. But all right, that's it. That's all I have to say. I kept it under 30 minutes, but I really am passionate about government affairs and helping people understand and realizing that, you don't have to be an expert to start getting involved. Just start now. Start now. You never know. You never know. 2 years, you never know where you could be. Shoot, you might be running for office or something. But anyways, all right, I'm done. See you next Wednesday. All right, bye.